Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first open discussion panel on DevSecOps. I'm Suid Adeyanju, the Managing Director here at RiverSafe. We will be talking about how the events of 2020 have impacted DevSecOps. We'll also be looking at how organizations are using DevSecOps to build business resilience. Another area that we'll be touching on is how businesses are preparing for the DevSecOps trends of 2021. And would also look at how successful businesses are incorporating security into their DevOps culture and processes. So on the panel today, we have two very experienced and knowledgeable individuals from the industry. I'll let them introduce themselves. I'll start with Paul.
Okay, thank you, Suid. My name is Paul Costal. I head up the software engineering capability across BP Group, focused on building out and enabling DevSecOps pipelines, leading our DevOps teams to our strategic platforms. So we've been on a journey now for 3 or 4 years, starting to build our maturity. And about 18 months ago, we've really started to focus on DevSecOps as a way of enabling our DevOps teams for self-service, to consume the platforms in a safe and secure way, and use those pipelines as a mechanism, a foundation, so that we can start to build DevOps maturity across the organization.
Thank you, Paul. Ryan?
Hi, Ryan Rivers is my name. I'm a Senior Managing Director at a company called Ankura. We help organizations react and respond to cyber attacks, and increasingly try to help clients get ahead of the breach by doing proactive work. I'd like to thank RiverSafe for hosting us today, and look forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So going straight into it, I just wanted us to discuss how we feel that the events of 2020 has impacted DevSecOps and DevOps generally. Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, so absolutely. So 2020 has obviously been a really challenging year because of the pandemic, and we've seen, virtually all organizations having to think very much about home working and remote working. Has that impacted DevSecOps? I mean, I think it certainly impacted automation from the perspective that companies now are forced to think about collaboration tooling, right, and how they enable their workforce to deliver. Specifically when it comes to DevSecOps, I mean, I think this is about organizations that are already on the journey with their digital transformations. So I think it certainly focused some minds around dipping the toe in the water around digital transformation for those organizations that aren't doing it yet. But for those that are, I think we continue to see an ever increasing pace around DevOps tooling, right, and how you bring those tools together to enable your organizations for self-service, right? It is a constant challenge. That the suite of applications is constantly changing, and for you to get the best bang for buck and agility from those applications, putting them into a DevSecOps enabled pipeline, focusing on shift left security tooling, identifying vulnerabilities very early in your project lifecycle, absolutely underpinning people's DevOps maturity. So yes, I think 2020 is a bit of a crossroads. It certainly focused some minds around automation, but I think DevSecOps as a thing to support agility and DevOps within an organization, it is moving at such a pace regardless. So yes, I mean, I suppose those are my thoughts for the time being.
Good. Thank you, Paul. Rand, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks. So I agree with Paul with regards to acceleration of digital transformation. I think that COVID-19 this year has helped to almost push and force organizations to take on more in the cloud and to do remote working. And probably companies were going to do that, but maybe not as quickly as they were forced to. When I look back on 2020, I guess a couple of things. Obviously, the COVID-19, the rapid cloud adoption. I think about Netflix, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But from a cybersecurity perspective, we continue to see an increased uptick in cybercrime. And one of the reasons behind the cybercrime, or the way, one of the reasons that it has manifested itself is because of poor software development and software code. And unfortunately, we see a situation where we kind of bring together the need to do remote working and the use of remote access technologies that IT teams are using to get into the IT when they're working from home or working remotely. Poor vulnerabilities in that software, as well as poor vulnerabilities in VPN software and routers and infrastructure that supports the remote working. So, you know, for me, this is kind of the increasing evidence that things like DevSecOps are so important, because we do have to get rid of these vulnerabilities. But we're not going to get rid of them completely, but we do need to find better ways that companies can deal with that. The reason I talk about Netflix is they adopted DevSecOps several years ago, and in fact have some open source tools that can help companies that are starting to get into this game. And they recognized at a very early stage that in order to produce code very quickly, in order to make changes very quickly, and do it in a secure way, they had to integrate the security testing within the development lifecycle. And increasingly, this is going to be more and more important. So yeah, what was, you know, on the surface, I don't think we see any huge changes. The impetus and the drivers behind using and adopting DevSecOps have never been clearer for me. As we continue to see cloud adoption as well, the use of microservices, containers, all of these wonderful things, you know, create huge opportunities to embed security in, which I'm sure we're going to see in the future.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Yeah, I also feel that the attack surface has increased quite dramatically because of the need to work remotely, and also the proliferation of, you know, mobile usage as a business tool has meant that you know, bring your own device type arrangements are allowing cyber criminals to take advantage of well-meaning employees. So the acceleration, like you know, Paul mentioned earlier on, and I think you touched on it as well, Ryan, of digital transformation and the move to the cloud has also meant that a lot of security considerations have had to be put in place for you know, for organizations that have adopted DevOps. So yeah, that's how I personally feel that the events of 2020 has impacted DevSecOps. Okay. The next point to kind of discuss really is what are some of the key trends we should look out for in 2021? Ryan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So what I've seen with this kind of rapid, let's say, adoption or wider adoption of the cloud and automation is that the technology is there, but the skills in order to support the technology and build it up in a secure way are still somewhat missing. So I think next year we're going to see a kind of increased demand for people with DevSecOps skills and cloud security skills. Unfortunately, we'll still see a lot of breaches that are taking place because of poorly misconfigured cloud environments. Again, you know, where security is being thought of as an afterthought. I also think that we're going to continue to see increased attack complexity. And with, you know, a lot of resources moving into the cloud, the attackers are kind of starting to automate their activities as well, you know, using cloud services to attack cloud services. And the only way to really respond to this is for the defenders to also have their sets of tools that can help to accelerate the detection and the response to cyber attacks. So it's another clear area of opportunity for those that are very skilled in the DevSecOps area to not only codify testing in the development stage, but also to codify the response and recovery, which use the very similar tool set in the DevSecOps toolbox.
Paul?
Yeah, so I think we're going to see a continual acceleration here in tooling in this space, right? So we see lots of duplicate tools doing similar things that make up those pipelines, right? And I think that trend will continue. I don't think we've got to a point where we've reached critical mass around particular tools within those pipelines. So I think it's important that we continue to have flexibility, right, within DevSecOps, right, to enable us to hot swap tools as and when needed, right? It also it enables us to create a productive conversation with DevOps teams that are looking to consume tooling, right? If we can accommodate the tools that they are already familiar with, right, then I think that is something that we need to think very, very carefully about in 2021. Also, I think we're going to continue to see this disruption, right, for many organizations that are grappling with, their initial steps into the world of digital transformation, coupled with cloud-first strategies, right? Being able to build out or start to build out a DevOps maturity within an organization requires, some guide rails, right? And you can do that through your DevSecOps pipelines. What you really don't want to do across an enterprise is create additional confusion, right? As teams start to go out and explore how to build their DevOps maturity, what you don't want is literally hundreds of very similar ways of doing the same thing, right? You will start to introduce cost and complexity into your organization if you don't go about this stuff in a standardized and templated way, right? So I think it's about, giving people the guide rails, right, so that they can really start to benefit from DevSecOps by identifying those vulnerabilities right at the very beginning of the project lifecycle, and moving away from a place where we're putting code into production, right, and then having to fix vulnerabilities after the fact, right? It's much cheaper, much more efficient if we can capture those issues right at the beginning of the development lifecycle.
Thank you, Paul. I think just following on what you mentioned there in terms of tool proliferation, one of the areas that we've seen some of the customers that we've been working with is that they've got different or separate DevOps teams using their own tool sets, tools that they are quite familiar with and they have been using for quite a long time as well. So the need to have those tools integrated is an area that I feel that would be a trend for 2021. I think organizations will be looking at frameworks to assist them in integrating a lot of these disparate tools that are spread all over the organization, and the ability to bring them together to actually deliver the business objectives would be quite key in ensuring that DevSecOps or DevOps is actually done properly within the organization. That's kind of where I see this going in 2021.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, through that work, you are naturally going to see the security teams working much more closely with your software engineering communities, right, than we've seen in the past, right? And that collaboration in itself is really powerful, right? Bringing that conversation together around what tools tick the digital security and compliance boxes to build these pipelines is a massively important thing to happen for any organization, right? And we're actually starting to see through that collaboration security teams directly starting to contribute to business competitive advantage, right? As we start to think about the right ways to piece those tools together, right? I think it's a really powerful conversation.
Absolutely.
And Paul, I agree with that. I think what's quite interesting is in the security world, we've been trying to embed good practices in the operations teams and the development teams for quite a while, but it's kind of been a bit of a push. And what certainly I'm seeing is that some of these SecDevOps tools are actually being designed and influenced by the development community or the operations community. And they're kind of meeting with the security community in the middle. So it's good to see that there's kind of a push and a desire on both sides of this equation to make code more secure. And again, in the past, you would have this perception of security being in the ivory tower, telling everybody what to do, but very, very, very far from the business. Whereas, what this discipline is doing is certainly breaking those towers down and bringing everyone, together at the coalface to actually sort out the real problems, which are these vulnerabilities and pushing out code and operations and production systems that just simply are not well protected.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key areas within that security is now starting to accept is that the engineers that are developing the code or developing the applications are the ones that know the applications the most, really. And they're probably best positioned to fix security breaches, or sorry, not security vulnerabilities that might be introduced into their code. So giving them visibility into potentially what the, what risks or threats they might be introducing into the organization through, the code that they might be writing or the application that they might be developing. I think that would be really, really useful, and would be a trend that I also see a lot of organizations following in 2021.
Agreed, Suid. And I think what's quite interesting, the tools themselves are also kind of being enhanced by that software development community, or it's, they're having a greater voice about which security tools get used, to support them in their development lifecycle, rather than being imposed security tooling that may not actually align with, the software development stack that the developers are using.
It's much easier to get buy-in from the app teams and the software engineering community, right? If you can bring to the table tools that they are already familiar, right? Tooling is an emotive subject, right? People have pet likes and dislikes around tooling, right? So it helps to build maturity. It helps to get us to a place where we're operating in a safer environment, right? If we can start to drop those tools that the teams want into the pipelines, right? And I certainly in my experience, that's really helped foster that conversation, bringing security and software engineering much, much closer together than I've ever seen in the past, right? And it's very powerful.
Absolutely. Really, really good. Thanks for that. So going on to the next topic, what role does DevSecOps have in supporting business development in 2021? Paul, do you want to go first?
So I think, for me, DevSecOps is the answer, right, to building DevOps maturity, right? So as you go through your digital transformation, as you start to explore how you build maturity at scale across an organization, DevSecOps is the pillar that you can do this through, right? So giving people those guide rails around a common understanding of what is expected when it comes to digital security and compliance through the pipelines is massively powerful in itself, right? And through that, you can start to build maturity. But also there are added benefits here, right? Because you can start to get insights from those pipelines, right? You can start to compare across your DevOps teams the number of vulnerabilities between different applications. You can start to track and draw insights into the velocity of delivery through those teams as well, right? So I think there are much broader benefits of DevSecOps purely around embedding security in the tooling. It becomes your central go-to conduit for taking code from development through to production in as safe as possible way, but also then allows you to draw insights into those deliveries, right? And those insights can actually help derive potential future business investments or opportunities going forwards. So it's an incredibly powerful combination, right? Bringing security to the table, no longer seeing security sitting in the ivory tower, right? Through that collaboration and conversation that shapes these pipelines is incredibly powerful.
Cool. I also feel that you have the opportunity to reduce time to market for business initiatives without necessarily compromising security. So the fact that organizations can react very, very quickly to market opportunities is quite key, especially in 2021, when a lot of these organizations have had a rough time in 2020 and would need the ability to be able to recover quite quickly. So being able to release products into the market in a very fast, agile, and secure way, I think, is going to be very powerful for these organizations in 2021.
Yeah, that iterative style of delivery, right? Taking small incremental change into production through the pipelines, and knowing that those pipelines offer you the safest possible environment to take your code into production. It's incredibly important, right? And we're in really uncertain times at the moment, so businesses need to be able to turn on a dime, right, to go after potentially new opportunities. The CI/CD pipelines in combination with microservices and agile delivery really is offering an incredible opportunity to organizations to do that.
Yeah, fully agree, and certainly the ability to speed up that process is so important. And if you go back to the old days where the development team would spend a couple of months writing some code, would go into unit testing, then into user acceptance testing, then into security testing, and then vulnerabilities would get flagged, and that might delay the product, or the product would go out without security. Those kind of days are gone. People are writing code literally in a couple of hours and pushing that code into live environments almost instantly. And so there is this need to be able to do these things very very quickly and efficiently. So there's definitely a competitive advantage for companies that can do that. I've got a great example that happened actually only this week with Tesla. So there was some vulnerabilities in the Bluetooth protocol, which allowed people to open the Tesla car and take it for a spin without the owner's permission. And once this vulnerability was published, Tesla was able to react and respond, and over the air kind of send an update to all cars around the world to fix this vulnerability. And that can only happen where you have designed your systems, not only your development lifecycle, but your operations, to be able to factor in changes and tweaks into the code, and do so almost in a real-time way.
Cool. Yeah, I also feel that stakeholders will be able to influence development as well, because this is going to foster, as I think we've all mentioned earlier on, the collaboration between the different departments within the organization working together. It's just so important and so powerful that being able to influence the direction of how a product is being developed within an organization is quite, it's quite a positive and a useful thing to have. And the fact that security is not an afterthought, it's basically working with the product teams and the engineering teams and the business all along the software development lifecycle. Just helps to release products at a much faster pace.
Yeah, and let's not forget reputational risk, right? We're in such uncharted territory at the moment, right? The markets are so volatile. Organizations cannot risk the reputational risk associated with, cyber issues at the moment. Being able to drive out those vulnerabilities right at the beginning of your life cycle before you move problems into production, means that you can fix those issues much more cheaply, right? Than if you end up in that situation where you have a production environment that's then vulnerable, right? So I think it's it's actually delivering a direct business value by protecting the reputation of the organization in itself.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. The next topic I'd like us to kind of discuss is how will DevSecOps support businesses to recover and build competitiveness as well as resilience in the future?
Yes. So I'll maybe pick up from what Paul was saying around the defensive side that DevSecOps provides to companies. I think if we go back several years, a website or a computer system gets hacked, a company has to go and rebuild that system from scratch. That can take 4 or 5 hours. You've got to get someone physically to go into the data center. You've got to get the CDs. You've got to get the disks, to put in and reboot the machine. Sometimes the hardware might have failed. You've got to get new hardware. And this job of recovery was a real pain. If we kind of fast forward into today's world with cloud services, the ability to recover from a damaged system is literally can be done within a click of a button, assuming that you've got all your restore points. And so for me, the kind of, if I think about DevSecOps and the SecOps side of this, as opposed to the DevSec side of this equation, bringing the operations and the security teams together to be able to rapidly recover systems, using coding, using scripting, using automation, is just taking the whole business resilience model to an extremely different level than we've ever seen before. And I think it's going to make a huge impact. We spoke about microservices earlier as well, and the concept of microservices, containerization, and the ability to build code and systems that have a very small footprint. You can build a web server that only is a web server. It doesn't have mail on it. It doesn't have telnet. It doesn't have SSH. You can build microservices that perform very specific functions. And that helps to reduce risk because there's less opportunities for the bad guys to take advantage of those entry points in the code. So in both cases, this can dramatically help companies recover very quickly and make them more resilient, which has become a lot more important. In 2020, the FCA recently released a paper talking about IT resilience and expectations that companies in the financial services industry will be cyber resilient. And if they're not, they'll be heavily fined. And there's been a few situations where banks have particularly gone down and haven't been able to make payments and allow customers to receive their salary payments and so on. And it's becoming a big regulatory driver as well, which is also important for companies to factor in.
Yeah, so I think that regulation point is a really important one, because I think a lot of organizations that start to experiment with DevOps and go on the digital transformation journey quite often struggle with segregation of duty, right? In both, moving code into production and then from an operations perspective, fixing issues as they arise in production. DevSecOps pipelines is a big part of the answer to that particular problem, right? It helps you build segregation of duty into your pipelines, right? It removes that risk, right? It's is a really big issue. And just to pick up on your point around containers and microservices, I absolutely agree, right? If you can make the components of your infrastructure as immutable as possible, right, and containers can be a big part of that, right? I think that's again a really powerful building block, right? As you start to build your DevOps maturity, containerization and microservices can be a big part of that answer as well.
Just picking up on that, actually, so being able to mitigate the risk that human beings actually introduce into product development and engineering is a big part of this, isn't it? Because it gives you, you can have templates that would provide some base layer security into the work that is the code that is being delivered by the developer, for example, or anyone within the infrastructure team that might be spinning up, um, you know, they might spinning up servers or spinning up network infrastructure that needs to be done in a secure way. So it just reduces the chances of something going wrong or somebody inadvertently or introducing threats or risks into the environment. So that's also quite important going forward.
Yeah, fully agree.
Okay. I guess the last point that I'd like us to kind of discuss is what are the key factors for future-proofing a DevSecOps department? Paul, do you want to go?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, right? And I think, be realistic, right? Your DevSecOps pipelines are going to evolve, right? They're going to evolve over time, and as we've kind of spoken about before, DevOps tooling is changing at such a phenomenal pace, right? So when you build out your pipelines, try not to build redundancy into those pipelines. Think about the future. Think about reducing opportunities for building technical debt into those pipelines. Be realistic that the chances are that you are going to have to hot swap tools in and out of those pipelines as they evolve, right? As your applications estates evolve over time, so will your tooling. So I think that's absolutely a key point. But I think, when you talk about future proofing, you look at building DevOps maturity across an organization. Use these pipelines as the foundation, right, for doing that, right? If you can provide people the guide rails, a templated approach, right, to do this stuff, and you make it affordable and the quickest possible route for delivery, that's safe and secure, that gets all of the digital security and compliance ticks in the box out of the way up front, that reduces the risk of individual teams then rolling their own CI/CD pipelines. And where I've seen that happen, right, the chances are you are going to end up with some issues, right? Doing this at enterprise in a way where you are enabling the organization and enabling the DevOps teams to consume, right, and as easy and as cost-effective way as possible is the fastest way for you to start to build your maturity. Now, that's not to say that you want to remove optionality, right? There will be instances where teams will rightly want to roll their own CI/CD and build their own pipelines, right? But for the 95% of user cases out there, for teams with both relatively low and higher levels of DevOps maturity, if you can build pipelines on top of your strategic platforms that enable, right, regardless of the relative maturities of a team, you are going to get a significant return on your investment. This is not easy. This is hard to do, right? But the quicker you can start to grapple with some of these subjects, right, the faster you're going to get to a point where you're really going to start to get a big return on your investments. So, this isn't just about IT, and I think we've touched on some of the business impacts here, right? We can actually start to see IT teams delivering direct business advantage through being able to release code through to production in as quickly as possible, right? And the way you do that is DevSecOps. It absolutely is so important in this day and age as organizations embrace DevOps and digital transformation. DevSecOps is the answer. It becomes absolutely foundational for us to build maturity.
Yeah, and just following on that, Paul, I think we've already mentioned this before, but I think it's worth mentioning it again. The working relationship between the cyber team and the engineering team is absolutely crucial in future-proofing DevSecOps department. It has to be a combination of those two teams working together within that practice. to make it successful. So, areas where we've seen this work quite well is basically embedding security engineers within the development team or within the engineering team. And that we've seen actually works quite well because they all feel part of a team rather than, it's a one team, one agenda. They're all thinking about the same end game. So that really is important.
You're so right, Suid, right?
Yeah.
That collaboration is directly contributing to the success of any future IT organization, right? You're seeing through that collaboration across fertilization of skills between the software engineering and security teams and vice versa, right? And I think we've kind of touched on this earlier, right, on the call, right? Recruiting in this space is incredibly difficult to do, right?
Yeah.
But by bringing those two communities together, they cross-fertilize those skills, right? And you start to see, right, a light bulb moment, right, within your IT teams. They realize that the security teams have a huge set of directly applicable skills that can be applied to some of these problems, right? And that collaboration in itself will start to build DevOps maturity.
Absolutely. I think you touched on having templates as well, so that you don't have, as an environment where there's so many different ways by which things are being done. I think it's quite key to have this standardized template. Although it's important to let departments or teams to be able to do some of the things that they would like to do in order to be more, be creative and be able to innovate quite quickly. But having a standard template that people can start from, I think is quite important, especially with greenfield projects that are just, being initiated. For them having a template that they can roll out very quickly and then build upon, I think is the right way to go as well.
It builds resilience into the machine, right? Because you then have a community of security and software engineering specialists that understand the lion's share of all of the pipelines and the likely issues that you're going to get. Yes, you should absolutely have optionality in the system, right? There will be specific scenarios where people don't want to consume a templated approach to this, right? And as long as the digital security and compliance considerations are met, right, then it's kind of fine, right? If people can manage within their budgets, and that's the right thing to do for the business, totally the right thing to do. But I would say for a good percentage, 75% plus, I would say, of all workloads, you should aim to have templated, standardized DevSecOps enabled pipelines that are fit for purpose, right? And by doing that, you get different workloads, lower and higher maturity teams, all feeding into, right, how those pipelines are shaped, right? And you end up with a much richer offering as a result of having those mixed workloads being pushed through the pipelines.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fully agree with this. And I think, I always talk about cybersecurity being a team sport. And in this particular arena, it is bringing together the security, the ops, and the development teams, to have the one fight, in a sense, fight the fight together. I mean, part of it is also around culture and establishing the right mindset about using and embracing DevSecOps and agile development programming, etc., as a mantra inside the organization. And that that often needs a tone from the top to try and set and enforce, but can be extremely effective. I do think we want to try and avoid people buying their own tools, going off on their own in their own directions, because otherwise we do get concepts of shadow services and the company doesn't achieve the right level of efficiencies by centralizing everything. But we also can't be too rigid because if as you mentioned, Paul, there might be some optionality which we want to keep in the system, and the whole concept behind the agile approach is it has to be fast and quick, we can't have too much bureaucracy around it. Final thing I'd like to add is for those companies that are starting on this journey, the greenfield side of things, it's quite a big elephant to swallow, and it's probably worthwhile taking a chunk and doing a sampled approach, maybe testing or rolling out an approach on some high risk applications to begin with, before trying to do this across the whole organization. But I guess once the people get a bite of the cherry in a sense and see the benefits and the great ways of working, it will rapidly spread throughout the organization.
Yeah, that's what we've actually seen in some of the work that we've been doing. Actually, most of the organization would start off with either just looking at greenfield projects initially, try and test out their ideas within those projects, or if they have a standard template that they've already developed, roll it out there first, see how receptive they are to the idea, tweak it a little bit, and then start moving up the stack and looking at maybe brownfields and fixing, trying to roll it out within those projects. So it's like you already said there, it's it can be quite a daunting task beginning, because a lot of organizations, the DevOps started way before security caught on to what needs to be done. So we're trying to we're trying to close the gate now after the horse has actually bolted. So we have to be, it has to be a gradual approach, and it needs a lot of buy-in and building relationships within the organization to actually make it successful. Okay. All right. I think we kind of covered all the topics. I think thank you very much for your insight into this area, and yeah, good to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Suid. And I think we've been on an interesting journey over the last few years. Obviously, RiverSafe, we've been partnering with you guys for a while now in this space, and I think we've all learned a lot over the last couple of years. And just to pick up on that point around collaboration, right, and culture, this conversation really does help with the cultural elements of DevOps. Organizations are really struggling. Some that are only just starting their transformations, others will be further along in their journey, right? But the cultural elements of DevOps should not be underestimated, how difficult that can be to try scale. And I think we've collectively learned an awful lot about how to do that over the last few years. And I think we've now got a really good understanding, right? And as a result, some really powerful DevSecOps enabled pipelines as a result of that collaboration. Not just within the organization, but partners such as RiverSafe has really helped us.
Yeah, thank you. I think the opportunity to work with like an organization like yours has been quite immense in that, it's such a large organization, and being able to get the DevSecOps working properly within that environment has been quite challenging, but also very rewarding. And especially the fact that we've been able to work successfully together to actually make this what it is now. So very, very thankful for the opportunity to work with you.